This might not be your typical creepy encounter, and please delete if it's not allowed here, but this kept me up for a few nights now. For some background, I'm a male in my late 20s, living in northern Canada. Last weekend, I got a call from a friend telling me while riding his Ski-Doo, he went by my cabin, as it was on his route. He said it looked like somebody had broken inside, smashed out all my windows. I was devastated, and went out to my shed to load up my own Ski-Doo and sled with boards and tarps to repair the windows, and hopefully to keep some of the snow out of my cabin until I can properly replace the windows in the spring. And just as I was about to leave, I got this gut feeling that something was really wrong, that I should take a rifle just in case. Better safe than sorry. As I started the ride into the woods, I noticed the sky was getting darker and darker, and I thought to myself, great, now I'll have to deal with the storm too. Luckily, it wasn't a snowstorm, but a thick fog that just rolled in. There's nothing more unsettling than being alone in the woods, encased in a thick fog, especially with God knows what around you. I finally get to my cabin, and sure enough, every single window is smashed. I unload my gear and get to work, trying to secure my cabin as fast as I can and get the hell out of there. At some point, I feel like I'm being watched, which gives me a lump in my throat because I can't see anything in this fog. I hear something moving in the trees. I automatically grab my rifle and put my back to the cabin, hoping that if something comes out of the fog, I'll be ready for it. My initial thought was it was the asshole who broke into my cabin, coming back under the cover of the fog to see what else they could take. But then I realized that no Ski-Doo was approaching me. I would have heard one from miles away, as it was so quiet out here. After waiting a while with no more noises coming from the woods, I get back to work. I get my windows fixed and return back to my Ski-Doo to get the hell out of there. After a short ride, I noticed that something looks like potholes in the middle of the trail. Turned out to be polar bear tracks, leading towards my cabin. A creepy feeling of being watched and the noises from the woods was a polar bear stalking me, and was the actual culprit of the break-in at my cabin. What disturbs me most is that I would have never seen it coming with all that fog that day, and my rifle would have been practically useless against such a big animal. To this day, I feel very lucky to be alive. This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30, around 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he'd gotten really jealous at this party we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we'd gotten home, he tossed me out into our front porch, and then locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside, still wearing what I'd worn to the party we had earlier, and it was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet inside the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned the light off, both inside and outside of the house, I knew he was going to let me back in. I felt so cold and so helpless. I thought about knocking on the neighbor's door, though we really didn't have many, but I had anxiety about walking up to any of them and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to the gas station and motel, which was a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone and call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. Ironically enough, the road I was walking on, Donner Pass Road, so the freezing cold was fitting. But anyway, a little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road I was on. Tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons. But then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn. My heart just started pounding. Just about froze up, forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up next to me. The guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet my friend at the gas station and she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and then offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well, good. I don't pick up hitchhikers, or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though. You just look like you need some help." He just kept driving next to me, telling me that I shouldn't think he's a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he'd just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials, and when he offered me a ride again, I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me, and I hopped in. The radio was low, and it was a little messy, and the ashtray was full of cigarettes. There were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight-colored bandana, and some other random items. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and really didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John, asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and then the fight I'd had with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked him about him, and he told me about his family. He was a young dad, had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog. And I told him it was like he had a perfect little family. And he laughed and said he certainly did. I then asked if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one." But he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach and my heart started pounding. I began getting choked up and my eyes started tearing up as I was looking at the window, watching the lights get further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around. He ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty, emotionless, totally dead and glazed over. I looked back out the window and down the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out of the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about how the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with 1 foot as opposed to 2, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. And snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared. All there was trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could borrow his phone again. I don't even know why I asked. And he then told me to stop talking. He then started talking under his breath, saying things like,
"Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me, dressed like a slut."
and other derogatory things. He kept saying these terrible things, way too many to type out here. I wasn't even responding, just crying, and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remembered the pair of handcuffs, the ones underneath those papers and underneath my feet. I managed to use my feet as a scoop, to push them as far beneath the seat as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe, if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so it would appear that it was a drunk driver and we'd get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything, it would hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking got me into this mess. He pulled off the road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap, fully covered in thick, and I don't know how many feet of snow. Before the trees thickly picked up, maybe 10 to 16 yards away, he turned the car off and coldly said there was something wrong with the car, and to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and was stepping out of the car, I grabbed onto the center console and cried and pleaded not to make me get out with him because it was too cold. He turned around to face me, his door still open, and shouted at me to get out of the car because we had to go check out the truck bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and head shaking would cause him to come around to my side of the car and drag me out himself. I was crying and said, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." thinking of everything you're told to do in these type of situations. Humanize yourself, use their first name. He stared at me in this way I can't even begin to describe to this day. He got back into the car, and I slinked towards my window, scared he would drag me over the console. He turned off the headlights, and everything just looked dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting up a cigarette and looking out his window, and then back at me, and then back out his window. He heard me shuffle my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but while still staring out his window, he told me if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. Oddly enough, I was sort of thinking about running minutes before that, but reasoned that if he wanted me to get out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or shoot me. I'm glad I was right. I think at this point I sort of hit some sort of bottom of my reserve instead of panic. There's a numbness, exhaustion. There was still a hot tear or two that would trickle down, but I just remember being numb. It was dead quiet, but I finally just barely audibly told him that my friend was still waiting for me, asked about his wife and children, and he flatly said he didn't have a wife or children, that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about, and he said,
"I'm thinking about what to do with you."
He didn't say it angrily, he just said it flatly and coldly, which scared me even more. I did start getting worked up back into a cry, and at that point, he told me not to cry, turned the car on, offering me some heat, and I again just told him I wanted to go home. Eventually he started driving, and kept driving until we were approaching a gas station. I was gauging the right time to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. While pulling up, he told me not to tell anyone, or he would find me. Then he told me all he was doing was teaching me a lesson not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost to a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changes his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already down and out of the truck, sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was so overwhelming, but then I stopped and remembered to try to see his license plate. I turned around but only caught the blur of the last 3 numbers as he was driving off. I ran inside, asked the clerk behind the counter to please call the police, and I waited until the officer got there, and I'll be honest, I was a little scared that it might be John. My fears melted away when the new-faced policeman got there. I gave him the description of John, his appearance, the vehicle color and type, the parts of the license plate number I caught, and the fact that he was an off-duty cop. Just basically anything I could. I asked him if he could look at the camera, and the officer disappeared in the back for a little bit, then came back out saying there was nothing on them. I asked if I would be able to look, and the officer said no, and asked me if I didn't trust him, and I told him of course I did. The officer then gave me a ride back home to my friends, lecturing me the entire time for hitchhiking, asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. I never heard anything back after the report was made, so I would try to follow up each time I did, and they never got back to me. Aside from this one time, I was told my case number didn't even exist, but that didn't stop me from trying to follow up. Throughout the months and years, I asked my friend if she ever heard of any weirdness or anything since that incident had happened, and she said no. So I sort of let it go and tried to tell myself that maybe he actually was just trying to teach me a lesson or something. I mean, I definitely never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. Still haven't heard anything back to do with the case, and I never heard any other odd experiences up there. Maybe it was just one random man trying to teach me something. Honestly, I think I'm just trying to tell myself that so I sleep better at night. Regardless, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car into the woods that night. My boyfriend and I went on a long-month camping trip to multiple states. Everything had been going pretty well until October 9th. We decided to ditch our campground reservation and randomly pitch our tent near Albion Basin within the Uinta Mountains, not far off the Secret Lake trailhead. We parked our car around 3 p.m. at the Albion Basin campground. Admittedly, it was a little intense because this was our first dispersed camping attempt, and we had no proper backpacking gear. Upon arrival, we realized the area we wanted to pitch our tent was about 2 miles uphill. At this point, we started to express regret, as we had a planned campsite in Nepi, Utah that we decided to skip on a whim. After grumping around a bit and having a large lunch to avoid packing food, we packed our backpacks with the best gear we had to get through the night as it was going to be 25 degrees. We set out up the trail, seeing the occasional family or couple heading down the mountain. As we trudged on, we both started to feel strange, as if we didn't really know why we were doing this, as if we should have just gotten a hotel instead of trying to play backpackers for the night. We both felt like we had something to prove, so we continued. Fast forward, we made it up to the lake. So we finally make it up to the lake, totally empty, so it's nothing like the pictures. Disappointing and eerie, whatever. We keep hiking up in an attempt for seclusion and flat land, and we finally stumble across a decent space. I see a cave in the distance and point it out to Jason to deliberate if it's a hell no kind of situation. But after he checked it out, he says it seems like a small animal crawl space, no biggie. We set up as nightfall was quickly approaching. We played some cards, then bundled up, and decided to go to bed around 8:30 p.m. as we planned to leave as soon as possible in the morning, maybe 5. We both start to dwindle slowly, after what feels like maybe 30 minutes. I woke abruptly at 11:24 p.m., with a feeling I've never experienced before. Woke up completely wide awake, scared but unprovoked, as if there was no way in hell I was going to fall back asleep. Which is weird because I always sleep through the night. Jason was asleep, so I just let him lie there. Alert, trying to listen to anything I could hear, which was nothing. Very silent. Around 12 a.m., Jason woke up stirring. Much to my delight, as I did not want to feel alone anymore. I told him I couldn't sleep, but he suggested I just rest my eyes as we were leaving early in the morning. I agreed, initially not wanting to be a baby, and just say I was very scared. This was very short-lived, however, and Jason couldn't fall back asleep himself. So we both ended up lying there together, trying to sleep. I ended up blurting out that I was scared. We agreed to just stick it out through the night, as it was now approaching 2:30 a.m. We had a small axe and a pellet gun for protection, so I did not need to be frightened. Not even 5 minutes later, Jason's head perks up so fast my heart jumped out of my chest and I whispered, "What is it?" He replied, "Listen." And I shit you not, we distinctly heard the sound of gravel crunching under our boots, as if someone walked up to our tent, stopped, and then walked off to the side of the tent. I felt the blood drain out of my face in an instant. In real time, all this occurred in no more than 10 seconds, but my mind flashed a million thoughts for a millisecond, and I was convinced maybe it was a ranger coming to tell us we could not camp there. So I called out, "Hello?" I'm entirely sure I heard human footsteps. Within 2 to 3 seconds of hearing those footsteps, Jason grabbed the gun and burst out of the tent for any chance to confront this person, as I knew he heard exactly what I did. Nothing. There was nothing there. We heard something walk up so clearly, but it never walked away. Hardly exchanging 2 words, we immediately packed up our stuff, looking over our shoulders the entire time, terrified, feeling watched. Booked it down the mountain with only moonlight guiding our way, too scared to even turn on our flashlights. This is easily the worst 20 to 30 minutes of my life, half expecting to look over my shoulder to find someone following us. We finally made it to our car. We locked the doors and started the descent out of the mountains, completely speechless and scared out of our minds. We finally reached the town around 3:30 a.m. and slept in a well-lit parking lot of a grocery store. We've obviously since discussed what happened that night. We're both completely haunted by the sounds of those footsteps. This happened on a Sunday morning in 1961, in my home area of eastern Kentucky when I was 19 years old. I was driving on a winding mountain road during a light rainstorm, on my way to visit a girlfriend at her parents' rural home. I was coming down a steep road cut into the left side of the mountain when the car slid into the ditch against the mountain, and then to the left across the road and over a cliff about 100-foot drop into a creek bed. The car rolled a few times and then landed right side up. I was able to get out with what looked like just a lot of cuts on my arms from glass. I realized I was about 20 miles from town in a lightly traveled area on a Sunday morning when almost everyone was in church. This was years before EMS or 911 or cell phones or similar assistances. I realized I was going to have to climb up the cliff and onto the road, or no one would know I was down there. I bent forward and grabbed the small tree to pull myself up. As I leaned forward, something warm and wet came pouring down my face. I reached up and felt the top of my head. I could feel my skull. I had a huge cut across the top of my head, ear to ear, and my scalp was hanging down the back of my neck. I pulled it back in place and tried climbing again. As I leaned forward, I noticed that up the mountain to the right about 75 yards was an old house built into the side of the mountain, and a short dirt road leading to it from the main road. Even though I'd traveled across the road and the mountain many times, I'd never seen this house because it was not visible from the main road. There was an old car near the house on that road and a man sitting on the edge of the porch. When he caught my eye, he walked out to his car and backed out to the main road until he was above me. He rolled down the passenger window and yelled, "If you can get up here, I can take you to town, to the hospital." He never got out of his car. I grabbed another sapling and began a very difficult climb. I managed to make it up to his car and got in. This was 1961, and the car looked to be about 10 years old. The fellow was about 30 years old, thin and wearing slacks, a shirt, and a fedora hat. I slumped down in the seat against the passenger door. He only said one thing during our drive about 25 minutes into the town of Paintsville, Kentucky. "You're losing a lot of blood. I saw wounds like this in the war. And if you don't stop the bleeding, you'll die. Take my coat and hold it against the top of your head and press hard." He handed me a light jacket that was lying between us on the seat. "There's 2 main hospitals in my town." And as we got to the outskirts, he said, "Which hospital do you want to go to?" Since my mother had worked at the downtown clinic, I asked for that one. We were in front in about 5 minutes when he stopped and said, "I can't get out, but do you think you can make it inside okay?" I said yes, thanked him, and made it the few steps inside. I'm sure I left his car full of blood and ruined his jacket. I got my scalp sewn up, 55 stitches, and was given some blood. I was in the hospital for a few days, but I thankfully recovered. When I got home, I found that my father had the car pulled up off the cliff. It was totaled, obviously. He said to me, "Now we have to go back out to that fellow's house and thank him and see if we can take care of cleaning his car." When we got to that little road that led to the house where he'd been sitting, things got very weird. First of all, the little road that led to the house was covered up with weeds, at least waist high, with no sign that a car had ever even been there. It had only been 3 days since the accident, which was not enough time for them to groan that much. I distinctly remember he was parked on that little short road. My dad and I parked at the end of that road and walked through the weeds to the house. It was a simple little frame house that would have had a bedroom, kitchen, living room, with a front and back porch and an outhouse. There was no sign that anyone had lived there in a very long time. Some windows were broken, and there was no furniture. This was an area in the countryside where everybody knows everybody else, and their business. As such, I asked my girlfriend's family if they knew who'd lived in that abandoned house, and learned it had been empty for a long time. Nobody knew the fellow who took me to town. Well, that's where my story ends. 60 years have gone by, and I've tried to answer many questions about the incident. Why could or would the man not get out of his car? Why was he right there at the house just at the right time? Was he passing through the area? He was familiar with the town he took me to because he knew there were 2 hospitals, and knew how to get me to one, and he knew how to find the house even though it was not visible from the main road. He must have been a World War II vet because he mentioned the war, and he would have been about the right age. How was his car parked in an area completely covered in weeds a few days later? I've decided either he was sent there to save me, or I was just unbelievably lucky, as I could have bled to death before anyone found me. I may have been able to walk on down to the ravine where the road met the bottom of the hill, but that would have been a long walk, with a lot more loss of blood. How was I able to climb up to that cliff, to his car, when I knew he was there, if I couldn't do it before I saw him? Now that I'm 79 years old, instead of 19, I have told this true story to several people who have had similar experiences, and they have suggested the stranger was an angel sent to save me. There may be no other explanation. When I was in my early 20s, my date and I decided to go to the Sail Inn in West Sacramento to play pool. We'd been there before and enjoyed speaking with the bartender. I can't recall her name. She was a beautiful, engaging woman. This particular night, we walked in and noticed the pool table was occupied. There was a man and woman shooting a game. So my date bought us some drinks while we watched. After a few minutes, the man noticed me and struck up a conversation with me. When my date came over with our drinks, the man asked if we wanted to shoot a game with them. It didn't occur to me at the time that his female companion had yet to say anything. So we said yes, he racked up the balls, and we played against them. During the game, we introduced ourselves, and right after, the man began asking some personal questions that started to bother me. Like, where did I live? Had my date and I been dating long? Did we live together? Etc. I noticed the man and his friend kept looking at each other. I became increasingly uncomfortable, even though the rest of the conversation was benign and pleasant in nature. Weirdly, the woman still hadn't said anything. When the game was over, the man asked us if we wanted to leave with him to go to another bar down the street. At first, I didn't say anything. The guy asked us again, saying they discovered a cool bar not far from where we were now. My date and I looked at each other, and before he could say anything, I blurted out, "No thanks, we have dinner plans." When in fact, we did not have plans. But my date didn't argue with me. I think he saw the look of panic in my face. We both grabbed our jackets and got the hell out of there. By the time we walked out the door, the hair was literally standing up on the back of my neck. When we got back to my truck, my date asked me what was wrong, and I told him I got a horrible feeling from those people and I just knew we had to get away from them. I told him it was weird that he asked us to leave with them when he didn't check with his date first. He shrugged and said, "Okay." I think he thought I was crazy. A few days later, I opened up the afternoon paper and there was an article in there about a woman from West Sacramento who'd been found murdered. I didn't think anything of it until I got to the page where the article was continued, and the picture of the woman practically leapt off the page at me. It was the beautiful bartender from the Sailor Inn. Apparently she'd been kidnapped, raped, and killed the very night I was there with my date. I was totally creeped out and thought what a crazy coincidence that was, and how sad it was that she had died so horribly. It wasn't until a month or so later that I realized why I'd gotten so upset that night. A man and a woman had just been arrested for the bartender's murder, along with the murders of several other people, 4 of whom were couples. There on the front page of the Sacramento Bee were the pictures of the killers, Gerald and Charlene Gallego, the very couple who invited my date and I to go with them to another bar. And apparently, this was one of the ruses they used to get their victims into their van. My heart did flip-flops in my chest as I read the article. Not only had we been targeted as their next serial killer victims when we turned them down, they selected another target because of me. I have lived with both relief and guilt all of my life because of this. Intellectually, I know it's not my fault the bartender died, but I've always wondered how different the world would have been had she been able to live out her life, even though I would have been gone myself. Needless to say, that was the end of my bar date experiences for a long, long time. I just found out that Charlene Gallego has been living in Sacramento under an assumed name. Apparently she was paroled there after serving her prison term. She's been making amends for her horrors by performing works of charity. Gerald Gallego died in prison before he could be executed. I know good old Jerry got what he deserved, but I'm not sure how I feel about Charlene living as a free woman. She claimed on the stand to have been manipulated by Jerry, which is why she went along with the killing spree. Maybe that's why she never said anything in the bar. Maybe she was under his complete control. So much so that she couldn't even speak in public. But I would love to have a private chat with her. This still brings me nightmares today. My parents were on vacation. They asked me to check the mail for them, so as a good son, I dropped by every other day. Well, on a night I was out with some friends at a local watering hole. We ended up closing the place down at like 2 a.m. I live about 30 minutes away, but my parents' place was only 5 minutes away. They were not going to be home for a few more days, so I thought to myself, screw it, I'll sleep there. Well, I got there and just crashed on the couch. About 2 hours later, I get woken up by the call of nature. And while I'm downstairs in the bathroom, I hear a noise upstairs. It sounds like someone walking around in the upstairs. So being a man, I do two things. First, I grab a weapon. The only thing I can find is a broom. Yeah, I know, a broom. Then I start to walk and sneak up the stairs. The noise is getting louder and more intense. I then realize that there is a person in my parents' bedroom. How dare they rob my parents? So being a man, I get to the door. My plan is to open the door a little, turn on the light, and then yell at the top of my lungs with the mighty broom in my hand. The first two parts of the plan worked. I slowly opened the door and then flicked on the light. I swing open the door with the blinding lights on, and I go to yell when I see it. The horrible sight. My mom and dad having sex. My mighty scream comes out as a mighty girly scream now. I go to shield my eyes and back out of the room. As my parents lose their mind, they start to scream and I back out the door and trip over something. That something is my parents' dog. That dope was in one of the rooms and saw me, then decided to follow me in. As I jumped in the room and screamed, my parents screamed back, so he thought it was cool to start barking. So I backed up and tripped over him and then land on my back. He stops barking and my dad slams the door. I say I'm sorry, turn, and leave the house. We've still never talked about it. Thanks for listening if you stuck around at this point. If you haven't yet, feel free to hit that like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. Also, I'm now putting all of my episodes into long compilation forms in any and all podcast forms. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. That sounds stupid. It's wherever you get podcasts, you can find the compilation of all these stories in long form. Long form. Okay? Yes. Look for it there. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all on those platforms. You'll find all these stories from here on out, from the last scary stories, the 2 last episodes, and now moving forward, usually I'd probably be bi-weekly. So look out for that. If you're not, or you want to listen to them in long compilation form, whatever you want to do, use them, love them, lick them, whatever you want to do with it, enjoy. All these links are below. Everything's down below. Click it, love it, bop it, flick it. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry I missed last week. Last week was kind of hectic. There's a lot of moving pieces. Basically, if you saw my community tab or a community post last night, I quit my job. I'm done with the fucking post office. I am absolutely, completely done with it. It has made my life physically and mentally completely miserable. I have missed countless things, family, friends. I've missed stuff with my appointments with my son, big deals, stuff, way too many things because I've been stuck and glued to that place. And now I'm finally to a spot where I'm not completely financially sound, but I can take care of my bills with what's coming in. And it's enough to finally walk away from that place and then pursue podcasting, content creating, YouTube, all of this stuff, man. Like, I'm 100% all in. I will be signing up for going to school for audio and media production, and that's going to happen within the next couple of months, hopefully. And till then, you can look forward to having a lot more content from me. My plan going forward is to have episodes just like this, the True Scary Stories episode, at least once a week. Realistically, once a week for that. And then one themed episode that'll have 3 to 5, sometimes maybe more short, medium, long stories that are themed around like delivery stories, home alone stories, first responder stories, like that type of thing. And then if you follow my shorts channel as well, there's going to be at least, I'd say, 1 to 3 shorts put out every single week, sometimes even more. And then I also have another, like I said, all this is going to be a podcast form. Also, if you are into 90s Nightmares, the other podcast that I host with Derek Weber, Scary Stories, that's cool too. You should definitely check that out. It's if you're a 90s baby and you love nostalgia and stuff like that, then you'll love this channel. Please go check that out. And I also have another channel that I will be dedicating strictly to true crime. I will leave the link to it below. I have not put anything out on it yet, but if you want to follow that, feel free. It's going to be all true crime, tragedy, horrifying stories like that, because I've noticed in the past when I put that stuff on this channel specifically, some of you like it, some of you don't. It doesn't get that kind of response that I want it to, so I'm just going to, nip it in the bud, make a whole new channel devoted to strictly true crime, tragedy, stuff like that. And then this channel will only stay focused on what you like and what you're here for, which is true scary stories. I love every single one of you. I hope you stick around and join me on this journey. I want to blow up. I want to do this for a living. I am so passionate about this. And for the first time in over 8 years, I don't feel glued down and heavy and staying put in this monotonous, depressing circle where I'm only in this job for the money because it's keeping the lights on. I want to do this. I want to be happy again. I want to create content that you guys listen to and love. And I really hope you join me as this channel hopefully grows and I can do this for a living at some point. That is seriously my dream. This is the longest outro I've ever done, so I'm done talking now. I love all of you, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.